In my last video, we covered why images crop on the web, but in this video, I'm going to share with you what we can actually do about it. When it comes to grid images, like on the product cards within a collection, we can either update the aspect ratio of the container to match that of the product image, or set the image to contain, as we saw in the last video. But when it comes to full width banner images, the aspect ratio of which can vary dramatically across screen sizes, we're definitely going to get some crop on most screen sizes. So we need a plan to account for that. The question of what dimensions to make your banner images when uploading to Shopify is something that I've been asked many times as a Shopify developer. And so I did some testing and I figured out the optimal guidelines for banner images so that they scale cleanly across all screen sizes. Let's take a look. All right, so what size/dimensions should my image be? This is the question I get a lot when my clients are uploading images to their Shopify site. And the first thing I want to mention is that you can feel free to upload as wide or tall of an image as you want, because Shopify has all of these things baked into the platform that compress the image. So there's going to be some natural compression, as well as within the theme, if it's set up correctly, which it should be. If you picked one up off the theme store or you're working with a good developer, it should only serve as big of an image as it needs to display nicely for its particular application within that particular container, okay? So the width here is usually 2 times the amount that it gets displayed at. So let's just say your logo is displaying at 300 pixels wide. You want to serve the image at about 600 pixels, but no wider. If you're serving an image that's 1200 pixels wide for a 300 pixel displayed image, then that's too big, but don't worry about that because that should be baked into your theme. Of course, outside of dimensions, there is different compression techniques, so make sure to compress your image as much as possible, but the exact dimensions you can make as big as you want. The more important thing is aspect ratio and the focal position of your subject in this banner. So remember, like we saw in the last video, the web is on a fluid canvas. So the aspect ratio of the container is changing a lot. You're going to have a fixed aspect ratio of your image, of course. And so that image is going to have to fit nicely on this fluid canvas. And inevitably, if you're setting the image to cover the available space, like we do with banner images, there's going to be some level of crop. So right here, I have this testing sheet here. I'm going to make this available to you guys. Just click the link in the description if you want to use this yourself. Basically, I've got these 2 components here that are going to hold your desktop image and your mobile image, and then you can put in your desktop image to test it across these different screen sizes. Or if you're comfortable with the web, you could just set up a web page and test it that way. Okay, but we've got this Figma file right here. So how do we use this? Well, we go down to fill here on this component, and I'm going to add in my hero image for desktop right here. And you can see here that that's going to populate all of these screen sizes down here. Now, one thing we can't simulate on Figma is the vertical focal point. So I can't set this to align from the top, unfortunately. So let me just hack that. So I'm going to just set the image to crop. And this is something we can do within HTML and CSS, but not something we can do within Figma. We could get this result from this image that we've inputted here, okay? So now you can see that we get some vertical cropping on a really wide screen size of 4K. And then on a MacBook Pro 16-inch, looks pretty good. 14-inch, we're starting to get dangerously close to the subject cropping. And then on MacBook Air, we've got some cropping, okay? This is with a desktop height of 1000 pixels, but you can change these variables over here. I've set them right here. So you can change your desktop height to be, let's say 800. And then you can see here that that produces a little bit of vertical crop on the MacBook Pro 16. So of course, it depends on your vertical height as well. But if you stay tuned to the end, I'm going to actually show you the fail-safe way to overcome this, okay? Same thing with mobile height. We can change the mobile height here. And I've also got a variable here for mobile breakpoint. So here I want to put the mobile image. I could actually put in the desktop image again, as I wrote down here, but no, I'm going to put in a mobile version, which is more optimized for mobile. And here you can see it looks pretty good on iPad Pro 11-inch and iPad Mini 8.3. But as we get down to like an iPhone SE, we're losing the model's faces. So that's not optimal either. Okay, so we're going to come back to this testing page a little bit later, but first we want to see how we can change these images so that they're going to look good on every screen size, or at least the screen sizes that matter most. Okay, so the issue here really isn't the cropping of the image, it's the cropping of the subject, okay? And there's actually a simple solution to that. The solution here is to add more dead space to the image, meaning space surrounding the subject to account for this inevitable cropping. So if we look at our desktop image here, you can see I drew a red rectangle around the subject. You can see that there's not much space on the left and right. In fact, it's less than 10% around the subject, okay? What we can do to make our banner images on desktop way more responsive is to just increase this horizontal dead space. So here you can see I've increased this to 40%. So I've exported this image and I'm going to put this back in our testing, but first I need to Control Z to get back to the image before I cropped it. So I'm just going to come back to before I cropped the image, and then I'm going to update the desktop image here. We're going to update the mobile image later as well to this one, the wide version. And now you can see on 4K screens, we don't have so much vertical cropping. In fact, we probably don't have any vertical cropping, but what we are getting is more of this dead space on the left and right coming through, which I hope you agree is an all right experience. That's how we expect the content on the page to be contained within a reasonable page width compared to the screen size, which we're going to have some gutters on left and right. And if we go down, we're still getting some crop on MacBook Air. We might want to bring these two models together. So that's something we could do as well. So maybe I go into here and replace this with a version where the models are closer together. And you can see here that this prevents cropping on any of these screen sizes. And so the only difference between all of these screen sizes in terms of the image is the amount of this dead space that appears left and right. But the models are in the center, and they're not cropped all the way down to a small screen size of a MacBook Air. Keeping the subject within a certain width is what I refer to as the safe zone, which I'll get to a little bit later. But before we do that, let's move on to mobile. And on mobile, we could follow the same principle of adding dead space to the top and bottom. So in this example, I've used Photoshop generative AI to increase the height of this image. And now we've got 50% of the image being dead space. But this is not going to produce the same user experience on mobile. So let me load that in to just show you on my testing page right here. So I'm going to go in and put in this tall version of the image, and you'll see that we get much less cropping. On iPhone SE, we can see the models now, but it's not a great experience because we've got all this dead space on top of the models, and unless we're putting text there, that's just wasted space above the fold. And unlike on desktop, where we're not scrolling left and right to get to the wide parts of the image, those are just in our periphery, this is actually affecting prime real estate above the fold. So we can't necessarily use this simple principle on mobile, but here's some other solutions we can do. Like we saw in the previous video, the easiest solution is just to keep the aspect ratios consistent. So if I update my mobile frame here, I increase the screen width or simulate increasing the screen width by making this frame bigger and smaller, you can see that the image is always the same aspect ratio, but the change that we're seeing is that is contracting and expanding in terms of height. So we might not want that, in which case another solution we might choose is to just reduce the section mobile height. So I'm going to do that in my variables here. So ideally, we don't really want to have our mobile height be higher than the mobile breakpoint, and we can make this much less than 768. So I might just say 450 here, all right? And then now you'll see that the models fit more comfortably in the frame. The side effect of that, if we go back to our testing sheet over here, is that we're going to get some cropping in tablet, but we can maybe update the breakpoint for that or increase the height on the tablet size. Again, on the tablet size, when it comes to tablet, we're not going to be too concerned with tablet because according to a lot of statistics, tablet traffic on e-commerce is around 2%. So it's kind of negligible. I think it's better to optimize for desktop and mobile first, and then we can look at tablet later, move around the breakpoint. If we really need to, create another breakpoint, add another image, but we really want to be optimizing for mobile traffic, which can be anywhere from 30 to 70%, and of course, desktop traffic. All right, so just to summarize what we've talked about so far before we move on to some edge cases and my final recommendations. If your image has a subject and you're concerned about cropping, which is kind of the subject of this video, I would use 2 images, one for desktop, one for mobile, because as I'm going to show you soon with this safe zone principle, the safe zone is going to be too tight if you're going to try and support screen sizes all the way from a small phone all the way to a 4K screen. It's going to be tight. Generally, we have at least one breakpoint and we split the image for desktop and mobile if you've got an important subject in the middle that you don't want to stretch or crop, which in general is most of the time. So here are some general rules. You want the fixed height of the desktop to be equal to or less than the mobile breakpoint, and you want the opposite on tablet and mobile. And then your aspect ratio, a general rule is twice as wide as tall, and then you want that to be the opposite on tablet and mobile. You think about it, if I take my phone here and I watch a video on it, if I'm watching a video on Instagram where the aspect ratio is vertical, I'm going to be holding my phone like this. But if I watch a video on YouTube, for instance, I'm going to turn my phone like this to landscape, or if I watch it on a TV or a computer, landscape is going to be how I watch that video. So just like that, you want to make your vertical image about 2:1, and you want your horizontal image to be at least 1:2 in terms of aspect ratio. And then as we talked about for the desktop image, a good rule of thumb is just to add as much space left and right of the subject as possible. As long as the subject stays in the middle, that should be pretty safe. And then for mobile, we can either remove the fixed height and force the image to maintain an aspect ratio. That's an easy fix, but you're going to get that variable height as you change from different screen widths, or at least reduce the image height or increase the image height depending on how tall or short it is now to more closely match the browser width on mobile that you're optimizing for. But what about a more complex example? Let's say, for instance, this is one of my clients here, Melrose Future Lab. The banner image here isn't full width. It's actually up to a container of, I think, 1420 pixels. But within that container on desktop, it could be anywhere from 768 to 1420 pixels. So that's a large range. And on top of that, we have this content here, which is actually HTML, and this content here, which is the subject, and the same thing over here. If we look at the actual images, that content isn't baked into the image, it's HTML. So when we're talking about our subject, we want the subject to include any HTML that's going to be layered over the top. So what I would do to account for that is, let's say, for instance, I'm designing this banner right here. I would include this heading, text, and button in my design, and then maybe pass that off to my developer as a mock-up. But the image that I'm going to be delivering to my developer is this one right here, so that he or she can add that content in there. But the same principle of the safe zone, which I'm going to get to next, is you want all of the content to be within a certain width, which is safe for all screen sizes. Okay. So as you can see here, I've drawn a green rectangle around the content here. I want that content to fit within the safe zone, which brings me to, I've written safe area here, but I think safe zone sounds nicer. We want the subject or the content that we definitely don't want to crop to fit within this safe area. So getting to the question, what size should my image be? Well, here's the simple formula. We want the width to be the max browser width by the height of the container. So on desktop, if you're wanting to support up to 4K screens, you could make the width of the image 1920 pixels against the proposed height of the container. And then on mobile, the max browser width is going to be the mobile breakpoint, because once you get past that mobile breakpoint, it's going to switch into the desktop image anyway. So let's just say the mobile breakpoint is 768. That's the maximum width that your image should be. But the more important thing that I mentioned just before is the subject, right? Don't forget the subject. So what the question fails to account for is, what dimensions do we have for the subject within the image? And for that, it's basically the opposite. We want to make the subject fit within a safe zone that is equal in width to the minimum browser width. So on desktop, that's the mobile breakpoint, because that's the point when the mobile image comes in. So that's the minimum point that the desktop image will show at, and that, if our mobile breakpoint is 768, will be 768. And then on mobile, it's pretty small, but I believe iPhone SEs are 320 pixels. So if we want to support basically all phones, we would make the safe zone 320. But as you'll see a little bit later, that makes it a little bit tight. So we might want to play around with that number. Okay, so I've changed the color a little bit here, but you can see here the safe zone depicted as these red objects right here. Now, as you can see on this screen size of 768, let's say for instance, it's a tablet, having a safe zone of 320, which I mentioned before, is a bit tight. So we can either add some more breakpoints and more images here. So you can see here that we've got desktop, tablet, in between tablet and mobile. So I've really split them up here. As I mentioned before, tablet traffic is probably negligible. So we don't want to spend too long on the wrong things. We want to optimize for mobile and desktop. We can play around with the breakpoint, even use solution number 1 of that fixed aspect ratio to fix it on tablet. But the priority should be desktop and mobile. And so if I load in back in my testing over here, some images here where they're just diagrams with the safe zone included. So I'll put desktop in here and I'll put my mobile one in here. You can see that no matter the screen size, there is no cropping of the safe area. The only thing that changes is the dead space gets smaller and larger depending on what screen size you're on, but the safe zone is safe. And I believe this image is based on the initial mobile height. So that's why you're seeing it's pretty tight here. So if I go back, change this to the original mobile height that I had, you can see here that it covers basically the full space on 320. But as you get up to iPhone 16 Pro Max, it just adds some nice little gutter on the left and right. And then it's a bit tight over here on tablet. So we might want to, as I mentioned before, adjust the tablet breakpoint, maybe make this safe area a little bit wider on the mobile image. Okay, so to summarize everything, if we go down to here, my final recommendations, this is basically the too long didn't read version of this video. If you just want to skip to this, these are pretty good recommendations if you just want to use these. The overall image should be on desktop if you want to support 4K all the way down to, let's say 768, which is a standard breakpoint. It should be 1920 pixels times by the height of the container. And then on mobile, that breakpoint 768 against the proposed height of the container. The height here is always the proposed height of the container. So let's just talk about widths. On desktop, you want that safe zone to be 768, assuming that's your mobile breakpoint. So just replace this with whatever your mobile breakpoint is. And then on mobile, as I said, 320 is the smallest you want to support for iPhone SEs. But as I mentioned before, if you need more than 320 pixels of safe zone on mobile, feel free to push that up closer to 420. It's better to optimize for mobile, as I said, than tablet. And yeah, so updating those final recommendations. The subject can be anywhere from 320 pixels to 420 pixels. Just make sure that if you make the safe zone like 420 pixels on mobile and you get down to 320, maybe you need a little bit of another strategy from that small range from like 350 to 320. You can finesse that a bit. But following these recommendations, let's just go back to these ones. That should keep you safe on the majority of screen sizes and especially the ones that matter. Okay, so hopefully that makes it clearer. Obviously, there is some variability within here, and if you need some help with this, let me know. But here are my general recommendations. If you start with these, you should be pretty good to go, at least as a starting point. And as always, if you need any help with anything Shopify, feel free to get in touch. The link is in the description, and I'll catch you on the next one.